As some of you know, we, in March, I think, we put together a similar supplement to the Haggadah. And that supplement came from requests that people were feeling the need for something. How do they deal with the Festival of Freedom during this time when our people are hostages, when there's war? How do we deal with it? And we put together this Haggadah, and while we were working on the Haggadah, we were hoping and praying and actually thinking that there was a good chance that by the time Pesach came around, the situation would be different and there would be no more hostages and the war would be over. And then, of course, that was not done in Pesach. And right after that, someone said to me, you have to do this for the Yammim Noraim also. And I said, yeah, but it's all going to be different then. And I can't imagine we'll be in this situation then. And we thought, yeah, we probably will want to do something looking back at the difficult year. And yet, here we are, still in this position, still with our beloved people as hostages, still with war going on, still with senseless, or I don't even know what to call it, senseless, but too much death. And here we are. So this supplement to the Yammim Noraim, very sadly, is addressing the same situation. And we once again hope and pray, and I don't know what other word to use, that when the Yammim Noraim actually come around, something will be different. We can't say it will, but we can still be hopeful and still work toward that. This book is a true product of AJR's pluralism and AJR Zionism. There are many different approaches within the book. And each one of us reading it is going to find things that really speak to us and things that really don't. And that's okay. And that actually in some ways is good, because that too speaks to AJR's sense of pluralism, and that there are many different approaches to any given viewpoint, and that many of them fall within AJR's sense of pluralism. I want to also be clear that when I talk about AJR Zionism and understanding of Zionism, we see Zionism as a very big tent, and that there are many different approaches to Zionism within that tent. And it's okay if we disagree on them. But we also feel that anti-Zionism is outside of AJR's tent. And so there too, there are many different approaches, and yet there are some that actually don't fit. And that's okay for us to say as well. This book speaks to, in the same way that AJR does, not only in terms of our pluralism and Zionism, but that AJR meets people where they are. That has been a hallmark of the school, but also really a hallmark of our alumni who go out there and serve in the community and know that that is what they need to be doing. We also believe in spiritual depth that is very deeply based in our tradition, but that also creatively speaks to the contemporary Jewish community. And that is something we see in this book as well. We hope to continue providing resources in the future. You'll hear more about them when we know what they are. So I want to thank everyone who contributed to this book. I think this book was harder to contribute to than the Haggadah, and we definitely saw that. So I just want to kind of extra thank everyone who contributed and really gave us their heart and soul in their writing. I want to thank the AJR administration for all of their assistance and in making the book happen and making the webinar happen. And I also just want to acknowledge how very grateful I am to have worked together with my friend Rabbi Menachem Creditor, who is the scholar in residence at UJA Federation, New York. and who brings so much of his beautiful soul to all that he does. And we're very, very grateful to be beneficiaries of that work. We're going to begin tonight with hearing from two of our contributors. I'm going to introduce them both now, and one will follow the other. We are first going to hear from Rabbi Anat Levin-Katzir. Anat is the Director of Education at Kol Dorot, a Reformed Jewish community in Oradell, New Jersey. She is also an AJR alumna, and we are very, very proud of you and very happy that you're here. We are then going to hear from Rabbi Beth Nadich, who is a board-certified chaplain and the incoming director, very exciting, of CPE at Hebrew Senior Life in Boston, Massachusetts. Beth has also been AJR adjunct faculty, and we're very grateful to both of you. After those two, then Menachem Creditor and I will dialogue about the book, and we will have some time for questions. So that's the plan for the evening. We're going to start with Anat. I pass it on to you.
Thank you so much. And I'll begin with just the gratitude of not only being able to share my words in this incredible supplement and being included in it, but to be able to come today and share not only my piece, but a little bit about my year and the inspiration and the thought behind the words that I chose. And so I'll do my best to make it through reading it. I've practiced, it hasn't always worked, but bear with me. מה עלינו? עלינו לשבח למשפחות החטופים, לתת גדולה לשורדי הנובה, שלא עשה אותנו מתחבאים בממד, ולא שמנו כתמונים באדמה. אשרינו שחלקנו אינו כשל לוחמינו, אשר גורלנו נקשר בגורלם. המתפללים אנו לאלים שלא יושיעו, שמא מחזיקים אנו במאבקים של הבל וריק, ואנחנו קוראים ונקראים, והפיים נופלים. איפה הקדוש היושב במרומים? השמיים מטים את ראשם, מביטים בתהייה בארץ המפויחת, יסודותיה שבורים, ומושבותיהם של אהובינו בשמיים, ועוזם נדם, ואינו שוכן עוד. אלוהינו, אתה עוד שם? זו האמת מלכנו? ככתוב בתורתנו, וידענו את היום, ועוד יום, ועוד יום, ובכל יום שבים אליך עוד לבבות ועוד לבבות, והם בשמיים ממעל, ובארץ אין עמוד. ומה נקווה לך? ומה נקווה להם? ומהי התקווה שלנו? What is upon us? It is upon us to praise the families of our hostages, proclaim the greatness of the Nova survivors. For the Creator has not made us hide in the mamad, nor placed us concealed within the earth. We are joyously grateful that our portion is not as our warriors, as our destiny has been bonded with theirs. Are we praying to gods that will not save us? Could it be that we are holding on to battles of absurdity and emptiness? And we bow and we break, and we fall on our faces. Where is the holy God of graces? The skies extend their heads, watching the scorched land in wonderment, its essence despondent. And the throne of our loved ones is now in the heavens, their powerful presence silenced, no longer in residence. Eloheinu, still there? Is this our truth, Malkeinu? As it is written in our Torah, know the day, and another day, and another day, and each day more and more hearts are returned to you. And they are in the heavens above, in on earth below no more. What can we hope for you? What can we hope for them? And what is our tikva? When thinking about the high holidays and what symbolized them for me this year, the Aleinu was the first prayer that came to mind. First, because of its name, Aleinu, the word Aleinu, I felt the weight, what has fallen literally alai, on me, on us this year, a weight that is almost suffocating. And at the same time, In the Israeli culture, the word alai is one that is often said with pride. Alai, it's a word of responsibility. It's a word of trust when you use it, when you say it, when you ask people to give you that weight to take on. It's a word that needs to be earned, to be worked for. And the other element of the aleinu is the visual, the collapse, the fall. And a word that I appreciate and has been foreign to me for many years, and is only recently I learned, is prostrate. When I looked at the definition, the word prostrate is both an act of reverence and submission to a greater power, but also one of distress, one of exhaustion and weakness. As Jews, we're pretty good at holding two contradictory ideas in our minds and in our hearts at the same time. This is what I felt that it was saying to me this year. This year, I felt both alive and strong and just privileged to exist, and at the same time, weak and broken and grief-stricken, all at the same time. When I was watching the news that woke me up all too early on October 7th, and this may sound strange, but as an Israeli family living in the United States, the news just sometimes plays in the background on the TV as we sleep. And it woke me up because of the alarms. And immediately the house woke up, and the first thing we did was look at each other and say, what do we do? What is aleinu? By that evening, we had assembled a team and created an operations room in New Jersey and had team leaders that met and started committees the following day. We jumped into action. Our operation room helped Israelis find their way back to service in Israel. We collected equipment for the IDF and for displaced families. We raised funds to make all of those things and all of the people reach where they needed to reach. We supported the Israelis family here in our community that one of their family members left for Israel. We supported in grief those families here who were realizing that they lost loved ones as the news was coming in and the information was coming in. We set up emotional and pastoral support for our community, Jewish, Israeli here. We set up educational resources, information for all ages. We kept asking, what else is aleinu? After 2 months of the operations room being in effect and operating smoothly as things were continuing to happen, once again, my husband and I looked at each other and we asked, what else is aleinu? And I put my US life on hold and left for a month so I could feel the earth on me physically to volunteer in the Otef. Everyone rallied around in support, not just the family and friends, the congregation, the community. Everyone was part of this aleinu. As I was writing this piece over the summer, I was working in a summer camp. I was there to support educational programming about Israel, but also the almost 30 Israeli counselors and 15 Israeli campers that were there that summer. The counselors were ones who just finished their IDF service or had just finished months of reserves in active battle, many of them. Almost all of them who suffered personal losses. Services were very difficult for them. Praying, talking to God, this conversation was extremely hard, more than any other year. But they all knew what they signed up for, and they made a very strong choice to come and tell the story that they had, their story, the story of Israel through them, a story of love and pain. And share their grief with everyone. As I was writing this at camp, their stories, their lives, their hearts were beating with mine. The translation was almost an additional interpretation to the Aleinu interpretation. Looking and researching and all the different versions and translations and interpretations of Aleinu, trying to find the right words that made sense in this battle, this struggle and conversation with faith. I also pulled in some of my mentors, literary mentors who had a similar struggle. For me, it's my go-tos are Yehuda Amichai and Chaim Nachman Bialik, that try as their might, they couldn't stop conversing with our God through their pain and their lack of faith, their challenged faith. Now we're here almost a year after October 7th. People are asking and thinking about commemoration. But how do we commemorate something that we are still in the midst of? How do our people find a way to still have awe and reflect on the high holidays with meaning during this time? For Israel, this was the first time that they had to figure out how to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, the joy of independence, while in the midst of war. The first time they had to figure out how to commemorate Yom HaZikaron while still in active battle and continued loss. The question of how do you chip away at this pile of grief that is Aleinu, while it is still continuing to pile and the weight is still felt. The Israeli narrative of coming together in a time of grief and loss seems to be challenged this year. Some even feel it had broken this year. One of the key pieces of it that people seem to identify is that we are missing the people who ask, what is Aleinu? The people who take responsibility, who ask the tough questions and take on the actions that are needed for the people. This year, especially, I feel that it is our responsibility to ask from our communities, from our leaders, from our congregants, from our families, from our friends, to take on this as their question, to take on this challenge and ask themselves, what is Aleinu for this high holiday season? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anat, for your powerful words. And I just want to express gratitude both to Ora and to Menachem for giving me the opportunity both to write for such a volume and to come and share some of my thoughts with you this evening. You can hear me? Yeah, okay, great. So I'd actually like to start with October 9th. In which there was a very large rally that took place downtown in Boston, where I live. And, you know, with very, very short notice after Yontif was over, the word spread, and many of us gathered on Boston Common. And it was heartening to be with so many of my people. And there were many, many politicians who spoke, most of them non-Jewish. The moment that really stands out for me from that rally or vigil or whatever we want to call it, as our dead were still being counted, was when one politician got up and said, there's a family in Lexington, Massachusetts, who knows a soldier who was impacted on October 7th. And, you know, we all kind of looked at each other. And then a Jewish congressman got up. He happens to represent my district, Jake Auchincloss. And he said, how many of you in this crowd of 4,000 have someone who has been directly impacted by the events of 2 days ago? How many of you have a direct connection? And every single person raised their hand, and I watched the non-Jews on the dais visibly startle because they did not really appreciate, I think, until that moment, that we are Am Yisrael, that we're such a small people. And from that moment, I began to feel this sense of, I'll just call it Yehuda Haleviness, in that Libi b'Mizrach, my heart was in the east, my body was in the Sofa Ma'arav. I see many nods on the screen, and I know I'm not alone in this. And yet, in contrast to the Aleinu, to the community, it felt so disorienting to be with my heart so embedded in the East, and to then walk out into the world and to see Halloween decorations and to see fake skeletons with their bones sticking out of the ground. I would burst into tears every time I walked around my neighborhood. My field is trauma. And it was just so hard to reconcile. But somehow the time kept moving. And we were making sufganiyot all of a sudden, except I didn't understand that because I had just taken down my sukkah, and that was strange because it was clearly still October 7th. And then it was Starbucks cups that were red and green, and everybody was happy. And the countdown to the new year, as we were counting up the days, led by Rachel Goldberg Poland with a piece of masking tape on our shirts. And I see that a lot of people have had this experience, and I'm grateful to be amongst your number. Disorientation has been the word of the year. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my summer vacation, to tell you how I've begun to understand what's happening. For those of you who have not read the supplement yet, I have a piece in there about tree rings and about trees. My summer vacation was in Sequoia National Park and Yosemite National Park. And the inspiration for this piece really came even before I saw the trees. We were driving up the road from about 1,000 feet to 8,000 feet. The road was extraordinarily windy, no guardrails. I should mention that I am pathologically afraid of heights. And I was driving extremely slowly. Every time we would even hint at a curve and I saw these steep cliffs with no barrier between us, my car, with everything that I hold dear in the world, my husband, my 3 children in the back seat. They're emerging adults, but they're still my 3 children. I would slow down, and I realized as I was driving 20 miles an hour instead of the 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, which seemed quite insane to me, that there were pull-offs on the side. And I was so grateful for these pull-offs, because what happened was that some people who maybe they were from the area, maybe they didn't have a pathologically intense fear of heights, they really wanted to zoom up this extremely windy road. And I realized that I couldn't. And so I began to have some peace, because I realized we were all going up this road at our own speed. We were all moving through this grief of the year, this trauma of the year at our own speed. And for those of us who just needed to go more slowly and be more immersed in the terror of what was happening, we could pull off and rest for a little while and let the people who needed to go faster just zoom on by before I even met a tree. And then I was blessed to be able to go a little bit off the beaten path and commune with these 3,000-year-old sequoia trees. They reminded me of something in the United States that I learned about from one of my CPE students called witness trees. There's a group of trees in the United States which are under a strange name under the Witness Tree Protection Program. For real. They are trees which are at battle sites or at sites of historical significance that are usually hundreds of years old and have witnessed the events that went on there. And there's a grove of 100 such trees at Gettysburg. And I learned about this from one of my CPE students as he was describing his theology of listening, that he understood himself to be a witness tree where others could come and sit in his shade and rest as they were seen and heard and understood. And here I was walking amongst these 3,000-year-old trees. You know, Boston, where I'm from, thinks it's historical. We have a lot of history here. 1776, there were so many things happening on Boston Common where I gathered on October 9th. Some of those things were the revolution. And they think that they're old, but they're not old like we're old. They're not old like Israel is old. And here I was with these sequoias who are in that range. And I began to wonder what they had seen. And then I began to look closer and I noticed that sequoia trees actually have a particular quality that they cannot reproduce unless they are involved in fire. Their bark has developed over the millennia to be particularly resistant to fire, so fire doesn't kill the trees, but the pods, the pine cones, and the sequoia pine cone is only about this big, but the pine cones need, or the sequoia cones, I guess, need heat. They need the heat of fire to open and to spread their seeds. And so these sequoia trees are marred, almost all of them, by dark black scars, by holes where the tree has somehow missing a piece and it's grown around them. And you know that deep within the tree, there are years that are black and charred, and there are years that are full and growthful. And I found a little bit of peace for the first time, because I realized that this year, it wasn't over. We're all going to have to grow around it because it's our choice. It's our only choice. And somehow, just like time kept moving on with the Halloween and the Sufganiot and the Starbucks red and green cups and the Purim, somehow just like time kept going, we are going to continue, but we are always going to be carrying the scars of this year. And for many of us, they're extremely deep. For many of us, it's going to be a number of years before we can actually grow around the scars. But we're Am Yisrael. And one of the things that I wrote in the Pesach supplement was about the thing that had kept me going over this year is knowing that our people have experienced this kind of thing before, and sometimes this exact thing before. And they've given us these gifts of time and gifts of language and gifts of liturgy that we don't have to come up with how we're going to react now. We can rely on our ancestors who are embracing us and who have grown around us and who have contained us as we move forward in time. Thank you so much for listening and for joining me in this journey of time and growth.
It's almost hard to start speaking now. Thank you so much, Anat. Thank you so much, Beth. don't know what to say other than thank you. I hope you get the depth of those words right now, for sharing of yourselves. I also realized I had not mentioned that Anat Levin-Katsir is also AJR adjunct faculty. And I'm sorry, Anat, that I didn't mention that before. That's my mistake. I also want to mention that some of the other contributors to the book are on this Zoom. So I'm going to mention the names that I saw. If I miss somebody, please write it in the chat. But I saw Naomi Whitland, Julie Brandon, Donna Greitzer Gottlieb, and Leah Kasorla. So thank you to each of you as well for being a part of this. I also like to acknowledge when my parents are on a Zoom that I'm on. So I want to acknowledge and always express gratitude to my parents, Rabbi Bill and Dina Horn, who are on.
Also, Michael McCloskey and Sherry Berkowitz.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So thank you to all of you. So Menachem, for us to get started, let's start here. I think I wanted to start by just acknowledging, reading the pieces in this book, and you heard it from both Anat and from Beth, who are good representatives of pieces we have in the book of the pain and the struggle and the I don't sometimes feel that pain is a deep enough word. But we also were careful in how we put the book together, that it starts with a poem from Alden Salavi about wildly unimaginable blessings. And the idea of our prayers for this year being that there will be, even despite everything, these wildly unimaginable blessings. And the book ends with a piece by Talia Werber about dancing. And the very end of the book is about, she has the words, and yet we dance. And those are the frame of the book. And I think I just wanted to start this dialogue with really that struggle between the hope and the healing that some people are feeling already, some people are trying to figure out, and the deep pain that is still very, very much a part of us. So I think I just wanted to start with that. How do we put these all together? So I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to begin with an emphatic agreement with a question mark. How do we? I mean, we've done this work now, first of all, as people, as part of Am Yisrael, as leaders. And I think Beth was right. We have been here before. In fact, we have been precisely here before. But ow, that realization from in my marrow, let alone from the words of such beautiful contributors. And I'll tell you what this has sort of woken up within me. I think I knew this already. I felt it. I might have even said it when we did a webinar for our first project, which I can't believe was first, and now there's a second. It's an unfathomable thing to try to even talk about. So probably what I want to say before I go any further is, I'm so sorry for the clumsiness of my words to anyone who might feel misseen if I describe us as being in one moment of time, and actually, and Beth pointed to this too, I haven't begun to even understand how much pain I'm in, and I'm only me, and I'm here, whatever that means, because clearly only part of me is actually here. So all of this is my way of saying, we're just doing our best, all of us are. And what I feel, I'm holding both volumes, in my hands. I feel like our wounded hearts at least have each other. Like I'm clutching us to my own heart to feel a little bit of comfort. And so, the Pesach journey, we were mindful about following the the trajectory of the Haggadah itself, which starts with Gnai, starts with degradation, and goes to Shevach, and to praise, from enslavement to liberation. And here we are without that kind of guidance. I mean, if we were having a conversation, quote, only about the scaffolding series of Chagim that we're coming up on, there isn't actually one linear path for us to follow. And even if there were, what would we do with a linear path right now? How could we say that that's where we are? So in fact, the conscious choice, and I think this was actually your decision that I felt incredibly held by, is to make sure that the bookmarks of our creative expression had elements of hope and dance. We learned that from the survivors of Nova, that beautiful tribe that I want to be with. I'm not a dancer, but even I'm inspired watching them to maybe move my body a little bit. And in terms of the beginning, I mean, wildly unimaginable blessings. Isn't it strange that every year, first of all, every year is a rough one. None like this, but every year is a rough one. So we start by saying Shechianu. But we start the new year saying, we made it. I don't think I've ever paid as much attention to Shechianu as I'm still here. That makes no sense. I don't take it for granted. How am I still here? How are we still here? And so I know I'm both answering and also expanding a little bit. We're here, and there is wildly unimaginable blessing. And I watched Irene Elovich, who was the DJ at Nova at 629, spin his discs for the tribe of Nova to dance again, which they have done now a few times. I think they are the liturgists right now, V'ani Chinor, and we're the instruments they play.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think it raises another piece, which is, where do we find, like, where do we look to our liturgy? Where do we look to our tradition? Where do we look? I think Beth mentioned we've been here before, and we have texts, right, that have addressed these things before. So on the one hand, really making sure that we are, notice whether we feel it, whether we're ready, whether we're not, right? Every person's going to have their own way. But to know that our liturgy and our texts do speak to us, and yet at the same time acknowledge that sometimes they don't, and that they're not doing it for everyone right now. I remember years ago having a conversation with someone who had had a particularly difficult year, and who said, I just don't think I can go to shul this Rosh Hashanah because I can't deal with this liturgy. And I said, actually, a lot of people can't. And she was stunned. And I think she was so relieved because she felt all alone as being the one who now feels out of the liturgy, out of the place. And so I think every year we have that struggle. Different people may have it. Some people may not, right? There's a lot of room here. But something's different this year. And so how do we figure out where to say, okay, our liturgy is going to speak for us and to us, and where to say, I can't. I know people who have just said, I'm walking out for Unatana Tokaf. And I can understand that, right? Like, and so I think this is another piece for us to, each one of us has to somehow find that. And I think for clergy, it's in some ways particularly difficult because they're somehow making this decision for their synagogue, not for themselves. And there is not a possibility that everyone in that synagogue agrees on it. So no, it doesn't matter where you are, right? It's just impossible that everyone's in the same place. And so I think this is just such a particularly difficult moment for all of us, and in some ways, particularly for clergy trying to figure out how to use the liturgy, how to relate to the liturgy, and to connect.
I so appreciate that, especially that last part, because first of all of my love and support to all of our colleagues here and beyond who are making impossible decisions, which are not going to meet everyone's needs and maybe will meet no one's needs, not even God's, maybe. Because how faithful are we being to the liturgy if we are being in any way duplicitous with our language? I mean, the Gemara says that, amitihu lefichach lo chizvu bo. God demands truth. So how can I lie to God? So I look at what Anat created with her Aleinu. Like, so I want to reflect on that. Anat, first of all, kol hakavod to you for piercing the original words. I don't mean only your creative and eloquent expression. I mean, that's Aleinu. And in fact, that's sort of or where I am with my thinking on this. I'm curious about yours, which is to say, Chazal had the same question, but we never think about it that way. We think about how do we apply the Siddur and what choices do we make when navigating which Siddur and which creative decision. But in fact, that's what Chazal had to figure out too. And another way of saying that, and I hope this comes across with humility too, is that we are Chazal right now. And I tremble with that. I cry with that realization. We're trying to figure out how to keep the portal between us and the divine, and the connections between us and us and us and the them that I never used to think about in these terms, how to keep the portals working. I think it was originally the Prietz Hadar. It's this interesting mystical text that describes revelation, right? What do I look at when I look at the words of Torah? Because there was a primordial Torah that was pre-words, pre-letters. I'm looking at God's face, which means I have to always be learning Torah if I want God's energy to continue animating creation, without which tohu vavohu again, without which the work of creation is instantly erased. So again, another way of saying that, I'm not only looking at you, I'm looking at all of us who contributed and all of us who are just going to do our best during this moment, is we have an urgent task, which is to keep the portal open for some kind of shefa. And if that flow, that divine flow, includes screaming at God for daring to take Unatana Tokef literally, that's a prayer too. That's Unatana Tokef, because we were chutzpahdik to begin with in writing any of this down. The language that we ascribe to Chazal, who was then, they were traumatized too. They went through loss after loss, and this was the best they could do, and how blessed we are to be their children and to do our best, maybe with some new stuff, maybe reinterpreting their old stuff, or maybe, speaking for me, feeling a combination of so helpless to make a creative decision right now, and also somehow comfortable in this primal liturgy that I used to chafe at. I don't know why. I don't know. I mean, I do know why. But I don't want to make decisions every page. I want the page to hold me. I want to know that the comfort of we've been here before is available to me, to my children. And just one last vignette. It's not mine. I've been quoting a lot recently from Elie Wiesel's essay Against Despair. I mean, to Beth's point that we've been here before, he talks about Simchas Torah in the camps. And one vignette, I pulled it up so I wouldn't get it wrong, talks about in the kingdom of night. He said an old man on Simchas Torah. Was he really old? The word had no meaning there. Noticed a young boy who was so old, standing there looking on and dreaming. Do you remember what you learned in Cheder? Said the elder. Yes, I do, replied the boy. Really? Said the man. You really remember Shema Yisrael? I remember much more, said the boy. Shema Yisrael is enough, said the man. And he lifted the boy, clasped him in his arms, and began dancing with him as though he were the Torah. And all joined in. They all sang and danced and cried. They wept, but they sang with fervor. Never before had Jews celebrated Simchas Torah with such fervor. And I know, of course, what could be heavier than saying it that way, except they danced. And if they can dance, we can dance.
Yeah. Except I get nervous to say that because I think there are those among us who can't.
Sure.
And so I find myself very often in that struggle between we need to figure out X, Y, and Z,
Mhm.
and the recognition that we're all going to have our own time of reaching that place. And it was like Beth said before, some of us will have to pull over and are not yet on the road. And I think we have to be very good to each other in dealing with that, and really respecting the very different views.
So
I oh, sorry.
in that, no. In that light, Aura, it's sort of what I was saying before about being clumsy with any even, fervent intentions. Um, it is also important for us to forgive each other for dancing
Yes.
and to forgive each other for not dancing. And we have to be the holistic people we are, which is a page out of Ashamnu. I didn't do all of these things, but we say it in the context of the community so that we can support each other if it does affect some or one of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been thinking about, I'm a biblicist, so I naturally think a lot about the Torah and Haftarah readings of the Yammim Noraim, and that's a place where I always focus. And I was thinking about them recently and rereading them and really noticing the great amount of journeying, like being on a path that happens in those texts. And whether it's, first of all, the amount of loss, but let's even put that on the side. I don't mean to put it on the side, but for this minute, let's put it on the side. But just to think about the amount of being on a path, whether it's Abraham and Yitzchak on a path, whether it's Hannah's family on the path to Shiloh, whether it's Hagar and Yishmael kind of not having a path, but traveling nonetheless, whether it's in the book of Jeremiah, the Israelites on a path. And what it's made me think about is I remember speaking with a woman who had a terribly tragic loss. She was describing how she lived past it. And she said it took her 2 years before she even knew there was a path. She wasn't on the path yet. She wasn't past the path, but it took her 2 years to even know that there was a path there for her. And that was the beginning for her of finding her way back to herself or to her new self, however we want to say it. And I've been thinking about that with these Torah readings and with our time now, that for some of us, I think these paths in the Torah and Haftarah readings, we're already on them. And for some of us, I think there is the hope of knowing a path is there. And that knowledge that there is a path, even if we're not on it yet, may be some of the best things we can do right now, and as far as some of us can go. And so I wanted to throw that into the mix as well.
Yeah, I remember a colleague, Rabbi Karen Rees-Medwin, friend to a whole bunch of us, wrote at the beginning of the pandemic, you're going to have a Shvach Seder. That's fine. right? The recognition that some things were out of reach at the moment, even figuring out the how, like, where am I going? How am I going to get there? Come on, be kind to yourself. Inui nefesh, even the suffering, the discomfort we're supposed to have on Yom Kippur is never supposed to be damaging. And so it's really, I take to heart your words there, because though it might sound like I know where I am right now, I am very much, as you described, unclear as to the path. I may be part of so many different responses, and I hope armies of helpers, including everyone here. But I'm not feeling so sure. This is going to take time. But I wanted to say, to your credit, not only to the contributors, but or specifically to you, the fact that we will have these to remind us in an edut kind of way, a testimony kind of way, these were our raw feelings. This is where we are and were. We don't get to say it in the past tense yet. And we ourselves might never actually say it in the past tense without real question marks, real twinges. But I will tell you, just from my work today, at UJA, we have a program called the Coffee House that we run with an agency called Self-Help, where Shoah survivors come together with our staff and younger people, and they dance and they sing and they socialize. There is something about witnessing that in the middle of this that brings me incredible strength. And I, of course, it's terribly sad to say, we are there in so many ways again, though not the same. And perhaps we can learn from how we have loved our own family as they come through, and we ourselves come through, ongoing trauma and instability. That self-care is the language we use to describe caring for others. In fact, Rabbi Harold Kushner of blessed memory has a great phrase. I might have shared it before with some of us. He said, if bookstores had help others sections, there'd be no need for self-help sections. And I think that's part of our work right now. We're very active in that help others. And I hope we don't leave ourselves behind in that work. But if we're helping this way, hopefully it's also coming this way.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt there. I think we absolutely need to revel in the love on some level. I think, there's something to seeing people singing and dancing and enjoying. I think any amount that sometimes we can just be with kids is also helpful, because it somehow brings out a different level of joy into our lives. They can be our kids or not our kids. I think it actually doesn't matter for these purposes. So definitely finding that place of joy and appreciation is going to be as important as everything else. I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's going to be on us to figure out how much of what we're saying now is particular to this time and how much is actually going to have relevance to future situations. And that we just don't know yet. And so on some level, we're doing our part for the future Jewish world as well. And when I say our part, I mean all of us. I don't mean the book, I mean all of us in figuring out how do we deal with these situations. I want to acknowledge Rabbi Matt Goldstone, who is AJR's assistant academic dean and professor of rabbinics. His piece in the book is about the halacha of using lulav and etrog that are just not in such good shape. And what do you do in years when you just can't get a good lulav and a good etrog? And there's halachic discussions that we don't have to go into this minute because our time is winding down. But I think his point was, look, we've had to deal with this in different ways before. And I so appreciate those who have looked back at what we've had before and used it to help us today. And I think that's something we will continue to do. Anything else you want to add before our time winds down, Menachem?
Yeah, real gratitude. I'm grateful that I can feel the gratitude. I want to start there. And I really am, we began our partnership and collaboration as editors and now as friends. And I'm also now an AJR spouse, with my wife having begun rabbinical school at AJR. So I can see that the work of these volumes and the thoughtfulness that goes into it pervades the many dimensions that you help make real in the world. So I'm very grateful to be a part of all of it.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to acknowledge there were a few people we didn't acknowledge before that are on the call that have written for the book. We have, I think we already mentioned Michael McCloskey, I think, Shari Berkowitz, KB Goodkin, Rabbi Michael Kahn. And again, if I still missed more people, please forgive me. That was not intentional. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank everyone even more for just being part of this conversation, and that this conversation is so important when we have it in short emails, when we're texting, when we're talking, when we're just reading each other's work and reading each other's Facebook posts. All of this conversation and community, or I should say communities, are so important and so valuable to so many of us. So thank you to everyone. And Menachem, are you up for ending us with a song? Or if you're not, it's okay.
Sure, I'd love to. All right, so I'm going to do that. And I think what we decided before is that you'll be on mute so that we don't have an echo, yeah? Okay. I would never say that I would ask Dr. Ora Horn-Prauser not to be heard, but for the purpose of this. So I'm going to put it on gallery so I can see you all. Can you hear this guitar? Okay. So this is Hayom Ta'amseinu. It's a melody by Craig, for those who know it. You can find it on his album Inscribed. I wish it to all of you as whatever tone you wish to hear it in, but I'll tell you how I'm saying it. Hayom Ta'amseinu, right? Today, strengthen us. It's one of the few times as a tefillah we end our own sentence with Amen. So if you can muster the strength to a prayer for your own strength, let alone help the community find the strength to say such a thing, blessing you with strength as you help lead our people forward during these next holy days. I'm going to do it one more time. If you want to put in a word where Ta'amseinu used to be, what are you praying for? May it be a good year, friends. Shana Tova to you and to yours and to all of Am Yisrael.
Thank you so much, everyone. And please note, Kendra Lois Kittner is also a contributor. I saw her when you were singing. So one more. Thank you so much, everyone. So glad we could be together. And wishing everyone a Shana Tova and a Shnat Besorot Tovot, a year of good tidings.
Amen.